Well, welcome everyone to another episode of WA This Week. Live at home from my veranda in Cottesloe. Yes, some of you may recall from my message last week, I had a little bit of surgery on my face, which kept me out last week. And lo and behold, over that weekend, I developed COVID symptoms and indeed tested positive. So have to be home for 5 days, which is the requirement. But a really interesting week, and I'm just disappointed I can't be in Parliament this week. First of all, and most importantly, of course, we had the federal budget, then followed by the state budget. And this week is the chance that the opposition gets in Parliament to reply to that state budget. And look, an interesting state budget. Our state's blessed, and I've discussed that a number of times. We just have massive income. Around half of Australia's export income, or even more at times, comes in through Western Australia. We're only 12% of the population, so we're a really wealthy state. And I know a lot of people do it tough, but as a state, we have massive advantages over to the eastern states in that regard. And our domestic economy is relatively less important because of that massive export income. And the state government reported a $4.2 billion surplus. Now, we know where that surplus came from. It's nothing to do with the state government. I mean, they'll have to beat their chest and boast about how they're doing so much. But in fact, it comes from the GST fix that the federal Liberal government and national government put in place when they were last in office, but also comes from massive iron ore royalties. I mean, the budget was forecasting, I think, $66 for iron ore. Indeed, iron ore hasn't dropped below $100, I think. And that's US, of course, so you can divide that by the exchange rate to get that in Australian dollars. And that's delivered huge royalties into the state government budgets. What have they done with that? Well, they've done what they've done in the last few budgets, and that is big promises. But of course, what do we see over the last year? They don't deliver. Look, front and centre, though, they know that housing is becoming a major political problem for them, and it should. They are the root cause of that problem because of decisions they made right at the start of their government and then during COVID. And now they're pouring even more money into social housing. They say they're up to $4 billion. I'm frankly sick and tired of announcements about how much money they're putting into social housing. Any of you that are on the social housing wait list know those houses are not being delivered. I think they're probably just at the pivot point where after 6 years, they've actually just replaced the social houses they sold, the 1,300 social houses they sold when they came into government. Complete failure. They can promise all they like. They can't deliver, and that's what we've seen consistently. They can promise 1 million new homes. It's not going to make them deliver any more. So that's a real disappointment. Government have come in again, McGowan, desperate to keep his popularity up. He loves the fact that he's the supremely popular state premier, and has put out a general rebate on power bills again. Look, I will say this time the government has heeded my criticism of them in the past, and that is without targeting. They haven't targeted the broader rebate, but there is a targeted rebate as well, and the federal government program is a targeted rebate program for people in need. But again, billionaires in my electorate are going to get the same rebate as someone who is, struggling to buy food for their kids, and doing it tough. And I just think that's ridiculous. They don't need it. Whereas there are people who desperately need help, but of course does nothing to help the homeless, those people who are sleeping rough. They're not going to get a penny out of this because guess what? They don't have any power. That's what they dream of, I think, and that is having the ability to have a home where they've got a power bill, because they don't have it, because this government's completely failed to deal with that problem. But underlying fees and charges still up 2.5%, as my colleagues, Dr Steve Thomas, pointed out. Our shadow treasurer, excuse my COVID cough, the amount of money the government's getting, I think now is over 600, an increase above any of the rebates. They just keep on increasing the underlying fees and charges, so you'll pay. This is purely about McGowan maintaining his popularity. It's not going to provide the needed help for those people most in need. And the other one that I really think is that this should concern every Western Australian, and this is a structural problem of debt in the state. Now, much was made by Labor about the debt accumulated by the previous Liberal government. But of course, why was that? One, we had 500,000 people come into the state, an unprecedented migration of people into the state of Western Australia during their term. But at the same time, we had a complete collapse of the iron ore price. It got down to, I think, actually under $40 a tonne. But because this government have enjoyed massive, one, the GST fix, but also massive royalties from iron ore, because the iron ore price has gone so high and stayed high because of demand, almost exclusively increased demand out of China. And, Ben White, when he was the Treasurer, the former Labor Treasurer, obviously left Parliament now, but he and Mark McGowan at the last election, what they promised was, they said that they would, those windfall profits from the iron ore royalties, when the iron ore price was above $85 a tonne, and when the GST return to Western Australia was above 65 cents in the dollar, excuse me, they would pay half of that increased royalty into the pay off debt. What do we see under this government? Debt has gone down marginally from the $32 billion it was when they came into office, but their forward estimates have got to go to $36 billion. And they have just squandered this boom, and they are squandering this boom. This is literally a once-in-a-lifetime boom that we're experiencing. They should be paying down debt so that future generations aren't burdened with it. They're not doing it. They're not meeting the promise that they made when they got elected in 2017. And they like to criticise the former coalition government, but they are actually in a position to do something meaningful, and they're not. They're squandering it. $12 billion now, I believe, on Metronet, a massive program, despite the fact that patronage on the rail line still has not, well, I don't think it will recover. People don't catch public transport in anywhere near the numbers they did before, that they're spending $12 billion. They're betting the farm on Metronet. They're not undertaking major structural reform in the state economy. For example, a job tax, payroll tax, they're not doing anything to structurally reform that. And they're not setting up our domestic economy for the future. And, as I say, a wasted opportunity. I'm sure, individuals as households, if you get that rebate on your power bill, everyone likes getting money. I mean, if someone walked up to you and gave you $100, you'd like to be happy about it. But the reality is that many people don't need that money. The 400 rebate, there are many people who need much more help. And as I say, no structural reform. So it's really a real problematic. And then, of course, what do we see? The same old things. You think about the normal top line things for government: health, education, law and order. What do we see? The hospital's still in chaos. I see heart surgery wait lists have gone up, fourfold under this state Labor government. And of course, anyone who goes into the hospital services just knows the stress that hospitals are under, trying to service patients. So, that hasn't been dealt with. Education, we've got this appalling situation, I think, for the state and for our children. And that is, we have partly qualified teachers now being put in charge of classrooms because there aren't enough teachers in the state. So, and law and order, gosh, and I've talked about this a lot. We saw that debacle at Banksia Hill, and we heard $30 million damage. I mean, let's look at that one just for a second. You're talking about children who are in custody. I mean, these aren't kids sort of out in the street going on a bit of a spree. These are children who are supposed to be under the watch and care of guards in a prison. Essentially, it's a juvenile prison, and yet they're able to get out and do all of that harm and damage. Thank goodness they didn't get out, out into the general community. You can be thankful for that. Look, I feel so sorry for the prison guards that are there, desperately overworked. And of course, it's another topic altogether. Got a state government that is doing nothing whatsoever about the pipeline of kids coming into it. They're doing nothing meaningful. They talk about programs, again, it's a whole topic of itself. In fact, it's several podcasts, but you go into those communities, which I do, and you cannot comprehend how any government can allow what's happening to happen. it's pure lack of care on the government's part. So they're not dealing with that. Look, and I won't go into a long discussion, but I'll cover this. Perhaps I'll do this in a little while. There are real structural headwinds facing the Australian economy. The 43% emissions reduction tax, that is an absolute disaster. It is going to destroy downstream manufacturing in Australia and in Western Australia. The energy-intensive manufacturers in WA have no idea whatsoever how they're going to mitigate and achieve the government's target. And they're going to get hit with massive carbon taxes, and that is just going to destroy manufacturing in WA. So a government that says once manufacturing has done something that's going to destroy it in the state, and of course the housing crisis. I mean, the federal Labor government, increasing immigration to utterly record levels when just ordinary Australians cannot get a rental or a home to live in is frankly ludicrous. Yes, bring in skilled labour where it will help build houses, but actually substantially increasing migration into the country at this time is going to cause generational hardship, not for the people coming in, but especially for the people who are already there, and especially young people who cannot conceivably get into the housing market. It's impossible, and I can't talk about it in detail now, but housing in Australia is essentially the most expensive housing in the world. Makes no sense. It's purely driven by appalling government policy. But look, I'll stop there. I'll take your question there. Look, it won't be as smooth as it normally is because I don't have my assistant with me, but I'm going to try and answer your questions. Around the train stations and parking at the train stations. Look, I think there's been a lot of effort put into that, but I think you're right. What's the point of building all of this if people can't get to it? And of course, people need flexibility. And again, you're going to have to excuse me, folks, but there are real symptoms to COVID. So I apologise for blowing my nose on camera. But anyway, better than the alternative. But yeah, look, in terms of getting to train stations, it's a real issue. You need all of those feeder services coming in. And this is the problem. The government's bet their bet the farm. I mean, really have $12 billion, phenomenal. So we do need that, and obviously parking. In terms of the Department of Community Protections and Children, they don't even know where these kids are half the time. I mean, it's just appalling. I mean, let alone sex predators out in the street. You may have read the paper today, where the police have got no idea where these people are. But these kids are running around. These are kids, look, and I know, look, when people commit serious crimes, and some of these kids commit the most horrendous crimes, I understand that you've got to protect the community. But boy, how do you get there? And look, any of you that I'm sure many of you do, you go out and about, you get out into the regional areas in particular, and essentially the larger percentage, a disproportionately large percentage of these kids come from up north and communities up there, given the relatively smaller population. And you go there, it's no wonder you got kids, they're never in school, literally. They just don't go to school. Their most basic health needs are not being met. They cannot go home safely at night. This can all be dealt with. I know it's not trivial, but it can all be dealt with, and it's not. And that's causing a big problem. Insurance costs for rentals. Look, this is the problem, isn't it? When you have if it's effectively utterly a seller's market, you have the most unreasonable things. You'd hear them, see stories in the press. I hear stories, people subject to conditions. I mean, I know people personally who are, in the most appalling rental accommodation, but they've got no choice. They can't just tell the landlord, no, well, this isn't satisfactory. They don't complain about anything. They'll put up with whatever faulty electrical systems there are and the like, because they're desperately concerned that if they lose the rental they're in, they're going to be on the street. So, it's a seller's market, and and what happens when that happens? There are people will abuse it. It's an unfortunate aspect of human behaviour. Now, look, there are many, and I know I've had a lot of contact from people. There are a lot of people who rent properties are very, very kind, good people, and they want to make a profit, but they go out of their way to help the people who are renting. But equally, there are some people who are a bit rotten as well. So look, insurance cost, and I don't know the particular detail of that, but as I know, the trouble is when you're in a market like this, you got no choice but to pay it. In that situation, people do rotten things. Look, any ideas? Look, send stuff through. As I've said to you before, there was a comment saying, look, I have some, Sonia said she had some ideas, but really happy to communicate and chat. Probably the best way to do it is, look, send an email to cottesloe@mp.wa.gov.au, and then we'll get back to you and with responses, and if it's appropriate, we can catch up for a chat. But look, thanks very much to everyone listening this week. Look, different circumstances, and I at least apologised. It's not an all polished effort by my excellent assistant in this matter, but hopefully this suffices. Thanks very much, everyone.